Welcome back. We're talking about China's Jing-Jin-Ji integration plan. Joining me from Beijing is Professor Zhang Li. He is chair of the architecture department at Tsinghua University. From London, we're joined now by Kathy Payne. She is the co-director of the International Globalization and World Cities Network, heading up global city planning. And joining us from St. Louis is Wendell Cox. He is Principal of Demographia and international public policy firm. Kathy, welcome to the show. Let me start with you this time. Megacities are, of course, nothing new. It's not unique to China. We've seen this trend in other parts of the world as well. Why is there a move towards megacities in the world?
Well, I think that megacities are happening due to world urbanization. Increasingly, people are wanting to live in places where they can get work. And in particular, we're seeing high-skilled workers very much descending upon global cities, which are therefore becoming much larger. They're spreading out across wider areas. And we've seen this over the last 30 years happening very strongly all around the world. With China, I've been studying China for 15 years. I'm actually in Henley Business School at the University of Reading. Business is a key interest for me. And I can say that Shanghai and Beijing were in the top 30 of the advanced business cities in the world in 2000. Now we're looking at them being absolutely up in the top 10, Shanghai slightly ahead of Beijing. But this is really important for China because China is modernizing. It's adding value to all of its activities. It's upgrading from an agricultural economy and a manufacturing and heavy industry economy. And so these cities, Beijing and Shanghai, are hugely important in terms of adding value to all those other types of production, which still exist, of course, in large measure in China.
But Kathy, is there a risk when we look at cities of the kind of sizes that we're talking about here that they could become unmanageable?
Well, we do see this all around the world. In particular, what we're seeing in the West, in Europe, and also in the United States, are these really vast spreading cities. Now, you could say, is that what's going to happen around Beijing when we look at this new development? I think that the advantage that China's got is that it's planning its economy, it's planning its citizens, its infrastructure. It's also looking to the West to see what's gone wrong elsewhere. For example, if we look at Europe, my research has looked at 8 big megacity regions in northwest Europe. These are obviously highly lucrative cities which have spread out across a big urban landscape. And there we have a huge problem of environmentally damaging cross-cutting commuting, which is happening by car, because we don't have the appropriate high-speed infrastructure for more sustainable forms of travel. I think that with China, because it's being planned in advance, the mistakes, in a sense, of the over-concentration that we now have in Beijing are being looked at in a very structured way, and this has got to be good.
Wendell, China is planning on moving 60% of its 1.3 billion population into cities. What does this current plan do for that urbanization plan?
Well, I think it really it helps to accommodate it. And in fact, in the longer term, again, you go to 2050, the United Nations, as I recall, anticipates that China will be 70% urbanized. And there's much more than Jing-Jin-Ji to this whole thing. I mean, we've got megacities now in Chengdu, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and so this is happening all over the place.
Zhang Li, Beijing and Tianjin are the second and third largest cities in China, but at the same time, 40% of the population in this area is rural. So how does that affect the plan?
Well, actually, rural areas actually is part of the plan because good urbanization actually means the good development in the rural areas. Good modern cities cannot exist without the existence of good rural areas. So actually, China is now looking into this issue because if you look at the world in the last 100 years, and actually all the urbanization, the successful urbanization stories are accompanied by the development in the rural areas. So China is trying to do this as well. There is a new trend in China these days is actually bringing development, trying to increase the life standard of the rural areas, and as part of this whole Jing-Jin-Ji plan.
Kathy, there have been similar projects like the one we're looking at in South Korea, in Japan. Are there any lessons for China from these countries?
I'm not so familiar with those particular cases, but what I can say is that I think that what I've done in Western Europe and in the United States suggests that actually one of the important things will be that we will see, because of the linking of cities across the whole region, we will see agricultural modernization being an outcome of the interconnections between advanced services across the cities. I think it's important to remember that Tianjin, for example, also has quite a strong clustering of advanced business services. So we're not just talking about the cluster of global industries within Beijing. Tianjin also has its share. And in fact, of Chinese cities, it's the seventh ranking city in terms of its advanced business services. So I think the networking between these cities, the connectivity between them, the functional complementarities between them, will certainly help in terms of agricultural modernization, improving life opportunities across the rural areas, and also, of course, increasing opportunities for rural to urban migration. And this is a huge development potential that China has, which the West does not really have anymore. So when we talk about the greying population, the need to have more high-skilled, young, economically active, China has enormous potential to use its rural population to advance its high-skilled population within cities through rural to urban migration.
Wendell, when we look at this rural to urban migration, a lot of it is economically driven, of course, but do you believe that there's enough attention to pay to things like the aesthetics of urban expansion, you know, making these cities livable?
Well, my sense is at this point there's an awful lot of rhetoric about the aesthetics of cities. I think we have to step back and understand what cities are about. Cities are about aspiration, and I think I think the principal way to evaluate the success of a city is the extent to which it facilitates better lives, better incomes, and lower levels of poverty for its people. Now, granted, this is within a national context. So if you've got, for example, we've had examples of this in the past, societies that have very bad economic policies, there's nothing the city can do about that. But when you're talking about a place like China or Europe or the United States, you're talking about places where economic policies are very favorable. And again, the key is really not so much to worry about the aesthetics, but to aim at improving the lives of people and reducing poverty.
Zhang Li, I have a question here, and I know that this is less of a design urban planning question, more of a political question perhaps, but the South China Morning Post newspaper says that planners may also have to overcome resistance from vested interest groups in the region with competing motives. Is that going to be a problem?
Well, I think that is the issue for most planners all around the world. Ever since there was shall we say, modernism planning, there is always this conflict of interest between the planners and all those different sectors of interests. And that is true for China. And for example, the planning of the Winter Olympics of 2022. And there are such things that can be observed. But overall speaking, because of the very strong government in China, actually plan and master plan are executed quite well in China.
Kathy, this is a question I asked one of our guests in the first part of the program, but I want to put it to you as well. What do you see are the main challenges for planners when they look at projects of this magnitude?
Well, in most of the megacity regions in the world that I've studied, a key challenge is there's a lack of joining up between economic development planning and urban spatial planning. It's not just about between those two different branches of forward planning. It's also that local authorities are very bad at cooperating. We do tend to see a lot of competition in most of the megacity regions around the world. And I think it's trying to get local authorities and local politicians to understand that actually the relationships between cities in networks these days are very complementary, and yet it's the administrations and the politics behind the cities that is not joining up. So it's about getting decision makers to think together, plan ahead together, both across the economic and the spatial planning lines, but also across local authority areas, because we're talking here about such vast areas. And of course, the administrative structures are like a jigsaw puzzle. They're completely broken up across these areas. And it's about trying to get different people together to plan together that's really the challenge that I've noticed all over the world.
Wendell, how did similar projects in China, ones like the Pearl River Delta Project, the Yangtze Delta Project, how did that unfold in that country?
Well, you know, the formal plans and formal projects are fairly new, but both of those regions have considerable advantages in the adjacency of the large cities. I mean, you've got urbanization from Aberdeen at the south end of Hong Kong to the north end of Guangzhou. And there's, when you're that close, there's a bit of forced cooperation and that kind of thing. Beijing-Tianjin is much different in that you have cities and urbanization that is not at all contiguous, that we're trying to tie together and make more integrated. In a place like the Pearl River Delta, you've got the advantage of it all being in a single province, Guangdong. In the case of the Pearl River Delta, of course, there are actually 3 provincial level governments, but they're close together. So it's going to be challenging, but the key is, and what will make it, I think, a lot better in the case of Beijing-Tianjin, is the fact that 2 of the municipalities or provincial level municipalities are directly controlled, and so I really would not anticipate great difficulties there.